Good day and welcome. Welcome to Learning Thursdays. I am Patty Corbett Ward and I work at the Learning and Development Unit in OASAS Albany. This is the August presentation of Learning Thursdays. For those of you who have joined us in the past, and for those of you who are new to this series, I just want to point out the key points on the slide in front of you. These presentations are offered to individuals in our field as a free learning opportunity to help enhance the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes that are necessary when working with people who come to your door, whether they're looking for prevention, treatment, or recovery services. Today's presentation is entitled Problem Gambling and the Family. Jamie Costello, who is the Director of Prevention Training and Special Programs from the New York Council on Problem Gambling, will be your presenter for the day. She will be introduced to you by Jennifer Berg, who works at OASAS, and she works in the gambling unit. They will be with you in just a moment. What I want to just remind you always, if you have any questions, feel free to send them to learningthurs@oasas.ny.gov, and staff there is very good at responding to you in a timely manner. All that being said, I would like to turn it over to Jennifer Berg now, and I will see you all at the end of the presentation. I hope you enjoy it. Jennifer, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Patty. I'm Jennifer Berg. I work at New York State Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services in the Problem Gambling Unit, which is housed in the Prevention Bureau. OASAS oversees the problem gambling prevention, treatment, and recovery services across New York State. We work closely with the New York Council on Problem Gambling on a number of problem gambling efforts across New York State. We invited Jamie to come today and do a presentation to discuss how problem gambling affects family members. So I'll turn it over to Jamie Costello.
Thanks, Jennifer. As Jennifer said, I'm Jamie Costello, and I work with the New York Council on Problem Gambling. I just want to go over our mission really quickly for anybody who's unfamiliar with what the New York Council on Problem Gambling does. We're a not-for-profit independent agency with two goals in mind. One, to raise awareness that gambling can and does become a problem and an addiction for some people. And then two, to also advocate for support services and treatment for those who are adversely struggled by gambling or are adversely affected by gambling. One thing I like to point out to people is that the council maintains a neutral stance on gambling. So we are not pro-gambling, we are not anti-gambling, we are just out to help the people who are adversely and negatively affected by gambling. Some of our services include, we have information that we produce and disseminate. We have brochures and videos and websites. Information is available in English, Spanish, Chinese. We also have some closed captions on some of our videos for anybody who's working with the hearing impaired. We conduct and publicly support ongoing research activities. You may have seen recently we've done some research around problem gambling and the views about gambling in light of the new gaming facilities in New York State. We also sponsor workshops, training activities, and conferences. On the screen, you'll see the information about our annual conference, which is coming up in November. And typically we do a 2-day conference. This year we have added on a pre-conference for the first day, which is really exciting. So we'll have a pre-conference in the afternoon on November 15th, and then our main conference on November 16th and 17th. And OASAS will be there and is in full support of our conference, so it's very exciting for everybody. So I hope to see everybody there. And now we're going to talk about problem gambling in the family, which is what everybody came to talk about. A lot of folks think that problem gambling or gambling in general is a problem just from an individual perspective and is only a financial problem, when in fact problem gambling affects not only the individual, but the individual's family, friends, neighbors, and the community, as well as the society as a whole. Problem gambling does bring on a bit of a tax burden for the society as a whole. So we're hoping that through this presentation, we'll be able to examine how problem gambling affects the family system as a whole, as well as how it affects spouses and partners of problem gamblers, as well as the children of problem gamblers. We'll go over how it affects them, what the signs and symptoms are of those effects, and some things that family members can do to help themselves as well as help the problem gambler, and some things clinicians can do also to help the family and the clients that they may be working with who might be affected by problem gambling. And at the end, we will also go through some resources of problem gambling, or resources for family members and clinicians so that you can help problem gamblers and their families. So I like to start out with definitions, which might seem very elementary. However, if you ask a client if they're gambling, a response you may receive is, no, I don't go to the casino, or no, I don't go to the racetrack, no, I don't play poker, when in fact those are forms of gambling, but there are a lot of other forms of gambling too, and I think our field needs to make sure that we're on the same page so that when we're talking to clients, we can ensure that they're talking the same language that we're speaking. So it's important to talk about gambling and how we define it and how we present it with clients as their family. So I want everybody to take a second, and if you have some paper near you, write down your answer to this question: what is gambling? Brainstorm some things that pop into your head when you hear the word gambling. And take a look at those words, or think about those words, and think about which 3 words you'd use to define gambling. I hear usually responses we get include gambling is poker, or gambling is detrimental, or gambling is an addiction. And when we're talking about just gambling, we're talking about 3 elements really. We're talking about risk, value, and chance. The risk piece of the gambling definition implies that you may win, but you may lose. If you're sure that you're going to win, if it's a 100% chance you're going to win, there's no risk involved. So without risk, it's not gambling. There's also the word value in there. You'll notice that I don't use the word money when I define gambling, because you can gamble on a lot of things. It does not have to be money, or it does not have to be monetary value for that matter. It can be a watch, it can be jewelry. I've heard of people gambling their last names away in bets. And when we talk about youth gambling, we have kids who gamble with Pokemon cards, and to them that's more important than $1 is. So there has to be risk, and there has to be some element of value, something that you're putting up for risk. And then there's the element of chance. For every single form of gambling, there's some element of chance. Dice and bingo are complete chance. Forms of gambling such as poker and other card games may involve some strategy and knowledge of the game, but there's still some element of chance. Unless you're cheating, you cannot control what's on the next card that is drawn. So it's important to remember that every form of gambling includes risking something of value on a game of chance. And you'll see at the bottom with a little caveat, in the hope of a desired result. Typically when we talk about gambling, specifically when we talk about developing a gambling problem and the means that gambling, the need that gambling fills in your life, we're talking about gambling when someone's risking something of value on a game of chance in the hope that they'll get some sort of reward for it, or that they'll increase their money or increase their valuables. So remember, risk, value, and chance have got to be present in order for something to be gambling. So think about that definition for a second and write down all of the forms of gambling that you can think of. Pause the video if you need more time. Think of all the forms of gambling. Some I already mentioned include poker, dice, bingo, Pokemon cards. So think of all the forms you can think of, and come back after you have your list and compare it with the list on the screen now. You'll see I've listed a number of forms of gambling on the screen. We have video lottery terminals, which you'll see at racinos and casinos. And that includes also slot machines, right? Slot machines are at casinos these days. We also have dice and card games. I notice further south I go in the state, the more dice I see played. And then we have internet gambling, which is available anytime, anywhere. Anybody who has their cell phone next to them or is on a computer, which I'm assuming you're watching on a computer, has access to internet gambling. There's also gambling that involves animals. Although you might not hear about dog fighting or cockfighting when you're working with your clients, that doesn't mean that it's not happening in their communities. So thinking about that, it's a form of gambling. We have pull tabs and scratch-off tickets. For those unfamiliar with pull tabs, I get the question a lot, what is a pull tab? They're typically available at Eagles clubs and VFWs, and I call it an old-fashioned scratch-off. Instead of scratching the pretty silver stuff off of the ticket, you pull the little piece of paper back to see if you win. So we have pull tabs and scratch-off tickets. There are hundreds of scratch-off tickets available at any time. You have sports wagering, which spikes in January and February and March in honor of the big game and the tournament for football and basketball. So we have sports wagering. There are also games of skill. And I know when we talked about gambling, we define gambling as risking something of value on a game of chance. And although games of skill against your friend or against another team, such as basketball or pool, they involve some level of skill, there's still an element of chance because you can't guarantee that you're going to win. So if you're betting on games of skill like basketball, baseball, or pool, or darts that you're playing against somebody else, it is still a form of gambling. And we have bingo, which is available in a lot of places. We also have raffles and office pools, which a lot of people don't consider gambling, but if you're purchasing a ticket at a basketball game, whether it's a fundraiser or not, it's still gambling if you're risking something of value on a game of chance. And in a 50-50, you're risking your money that you're putting in on a game of chance. So it's a form of gambling. And then we have all the lottery games that are available. It's important to keep in mind all of the forms of gambling when you're working with clients or talking to families and asking questions about entertainment or what do you do for fun, what does your family do when they all get together, to remember that gambling isn't just going to the casino or going to the racetrack. It involves a lot of other forms of gambling as well. So we have the spectrum of gambling behaviors. I know we talked about, I'm from the New York Council on Problem Gambling, and there are a lot of forms of gambling, not all are problem gambling. About 85% of US adults have gambled at some point in their lifetime, which means that around 15% have never gambled in their lives. So are they at risk for developing problems due to gambling? Absolutely. Just like some non-drinkers can be at risk for developing an alcohol problem. If they have easy access to gambling, there's a family history of gambling problems, or a positive cultural view of gambling within their social circle or community, they're at risk for developing a gambling problem. Think about the kids in the families of those struggling with gambling. Those youth are already at an increased risk of developing a gambling problem. So even non-gamblers can be put at an increased risk for developing a problem with gambling. And then we have social gambling, which is getting a little more risky. About 60% of US adults have gambled in the last year, and the majority of these folks are what we'll term social gamblers. They gamble once in a while, and they do so for entertainment and socialization. Social gamblers typically gamble with friends or family, and this is how nearly all cases of problem gambling begin. So people start gambling for fun and with other people. Many families use different forms of gambling as entertainment at family get-togethers. And for a lot of people, this might seem harmless. However, it exposes youth to gambling, and it further enables gambling to become ingrained within the culture of the family, which could do damage down the road for members who may become addicted to gambling, and could also serve as a trigger for those in recovery from problem gambling. So although social gambling is typically done for entertainment, for fun, and with other people, it can still put people at a risk for developing or for relapsing if they have a gambling problem. And next you'll see on the spectrum, so we have the non-gamblers who don't gamble at all, the social gamblers who gamble once in a while, and then we have problem gambling. We often get the question of, what is problem gambling? Is that sort of when I run out of money? My answer is yes, that is when you run out of money. But there are a lot more things to it. It's not just when you run out of money. It's not just when you see a counselor for help. In the simplest term that I can put, problem gambling is any time that gambling causes a problem in your life. So if gambling is causing problems in your relationship, if gambling is causing problems at work, if gambling is causing problems at school or in your community, or you're lying, anytime that gambling causes a problem, I would argue that it's problem gambling or a gambling problem. About 2 to 3% of the US adult population experiences negative consequences due to their gambling, which by definition is problem gambling. And then you'll see all the way over on the right that gambling disorder is sort of put out on its own past that line, and it's the only one that's really separated from the others. And that's because gambling disorder can easily be differentiated from problem gambling by only one thing. And that line is a diagnosis by a mental health professional. Gambling disorder is the DSM-5, or the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the 5th version. It's the term that replaces old terms such as pathological and compulsive gambling. In the DSM-5, gambling disorder is now classified with all other substance-related and addictive disorders and remains the only behavioral addiction included in the DSM in this latest version. So when we're talking about problem gambling and clients or families being affected by somebody else's gambling, it's important to remember that this really happens on a spectrum. We have the non-gamblers, they shift to social gambling or gambling once in a while, and then they shift over to experiencing negative consequences from their gambling. If they've been diagnosed by a mental health professional as having a gambling disorder, then they fall into that gambling disorder category. And again, just as the gambling behaviors lie on a spectrum, we have this chart of compulsive gambling and recovery. And I know the font is a little small, but if you just listen and glance around, you can hopefully catch a lot of things. If not, reach out to us and we'll get this to you. But again, just as the phases, the gambling behaviors are on a spectrum beginning at one end, and there's really no line of demarcation going from one to the other, from social gambling to problem gambling. It's very similar when we're talking about how the progression of developing a gambling addiction or problem with gambling sort of happens. There are 3 phases. There's the winning phase, the losing phase, the desperation phase, and then what we call rock bottom, which you'll see at the bottom. So I'm going to talk about the left-hand side of this chart. The right hand is the chart of what it's like when gamblers are in recovery and how they rebuild their lives. So how does a gambling problem develop? It's not something that happens overnight. It's rather a process that happens over time, again, with no really clear delineation. For the winning stage, which you'll see all the way in the top left hand of the screen, the winning stage is that first time that somebody gets that really rush, that adrenaline, and they win something. It could be big, and big is really relative. It could be $5, it could be $500, but it's when they start playing and they're winning. It's the thing that really hooks them. They start increasing their bet amounts or increasing their time. They're still excited about when they're gambling. And then because gambling is a business, many forms of gambling are a business, just like other businesses. The more you play, the more you'll lose, because the house has to win in order to remain a business. So the longer you play, the more you lose. And then in that losing stage, problem gamblers typically start to experience more problems due to their gambling. Prolonged episodes, they're trying to cover up, they're lying about it. They have some debts that they can't pay off. Their home life becomes a little bit in turmoil, so you'll hear how that affects the family. And then they play a little bit more. For those who keep going, you have the desperation stage, which you'll notice more serious negative consequences, such as panic, blaming others, and alienation in some relationships. This is the stage when the gambling really begins to affect the family, and it just gets worse from there. As you'll see when we get closer to rock bottom, we have things like suicidal ideation, arrests, substance abuse, emotional breakdown. Those are all things that are really going to throw a family into turmoil. So is the gambling a problem, or when is the gambling a problem? If it doesn't go from social gambling to problem gambling overnight, how do I know that it's a problem? Really, it's a process. So when is the family going to recognize? When is the family going to start experiencing problems due to a loved one's gambling? It's really all a matter of perspective. Some of you may have seen this picture before. What do you see in this picture? Do you see a young woman looking away, or do you see an older woman looking down? It's really all just a matter of perspective. There are 2 women in that photo. It can play kind of tricks on your mind. And understanding when the gambling became or is becoming a problem is very different by perspective between the gambler and the family member. So I'll use examples from a case study that examine the narratives of a gambler and his spouse when they ask certain questions about gambling behaviors and relationships, to kind of show you the differences between how a gambler perceives the problem and how a family member perceives the problem. The gambler perceives a lot of the gambling problems as individual problems and identifies with those individual problems. Those can include difficulties or absences from work due to gambling, a loss of income and financial problems because of the gambling. In the case study, when asked about their reasons for seeking help, the gambler responded that his own professional problems brought the couple to counseling, while his spouse shared that they were there because of their current economic and social problems. While the gambler and the partner might agree on the type of problems they're experiencing, the gambler typically has a more positive view of these gambling-related problems than the affected family member. When asked questions about their financial situation, the gambler stated, "I feel secure and pleased with my wage as it is enough for my family's needs. Regrettably, there is not so much money for future needs, and also my savings level is unsatisfactory." The spouse's response was, "It's hard to deal with family needs and cope with financial emergencies." They're both in the same situation and both with differing views on the financial problems related to gambling. The gambler, again, sees it more as an individual problem and sees it in a little more positive light. We're not doing quite so bad, while as the family member views it very negatively. On the opposite side, we have the family member who again has a more negative view of the problems caused by the problem gambling. But the family member also typically identifies the relationship problems prior to the financial problems. The problems cited might include marital trouble, lack of intimacy, less time spent with family, and social isolation. And let's go back to that narrative I mentioned in the previous example. This gives a really clear picture of the gambler's view of the situation versus the family members. When asked about trust, understanding, respect, and communication in familial relationships, the gambler and the spouse had very different responses. The gambler stated, "We are honest and trust each other. When people get angry, they do not deliberately ignore each other. When we do not experience crisis after crisis, and we cope with everyday problems. We listen when someone speaks, and usually we speak with each other on things that matter to us. The words that describe our family best are love, caring, and friendship." So the gambler saw that, things happen every now and then, but we're able to discuss them and communicate them. And he described their family as the three words were love, caring, and friendship. The spouse's response was this: "We are not honest. We do not trust each other. When people get angry, they deliberately ignore one another. Crises keep on coming, and day-to-day problems are hard to deal with. The words that best describe our family are, we do not talk much about problems, and we put them off till the very end." Again, they were in the exact same situation, but they had two very different outlooks on the effect that gambling and problem gambling were causing in the family. We had the husband responding with love, caring, and friendship, and then we had the spouse responding with, "We don't talk much about problems, and we put them off till the very end." So even though people live in the same household, they're experiencing the same problems, they're going to describe them and perceive them in very different ways. So as I'm talking about this family member, who are we referring to? Who are the ones that problem gambling affects? How do you define family? Well, problem gambling has been shown to affect up to 10 other people. So those could be family, friend, children, partners, siblings, parents. I try to let people know, a lot of folks who are watching this are addiction professionals, whether prevention, treatment, or recovery. And I know in my personal experience that addiction affects way more than 10 people. My addiction would affect many more than 10 people. So I sometimes challenge this research and say, I think 10 is a very low number, but at the very least, problem gambling affects at least 10 other people. So who are those people? Well, the family. When I use that term, the family, I use it very loosely because we all define family in a very different way. When you think of family, do you think of parents and children? Do you consider extended family such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins a part of the family system? Whatever form the family that you're thinking of takes, they have an established system. They've developed ways of relating to each other and ways of coping with stressful events and crises. Every family looks very different. One family system might not work for other families, but it's gotten them through what they've encountered so far. Does their system mean that they're normal? Does it imply that they're dysfunctional? It doesn't imply either. It just means that they figure out a way to maintain homeostasis within their close circle of members. Part of what determines how gambling or any addiction will affect their family is determined by the system that the family has developed. It's also determined by the size of the rock that you throw at that family. So we have these family systems. Some are set up very stably, some are set up a little different. And then you take a rock and you throw it in, right? What is the size of that addiction? Is the gambling problem only causing a few problems and we've sort of nipped it in the bud? Or is that gambling addiction causing more problems and it's knocked our tower over? Every family is going to respond differently depending on the size and the effect of the addiction and the problems that accompany it, as well as how their family system is built. If their family system has a solid foundation, like that pile on the top in the middle or on the left, it has a pretty solid foundation, it may be affected less than the families whose system was built on unsteady ground or a family whose roles have been confused. I look at the picture on the right and I think of that tiny little rock holding the big one up or the tiny little ones. That family system, maybe if we think about the larger rocks being the adults or the older children and the smaller ones being the younger children, it's a little less stable than the one in the center on the top. And then we have the one at the bottom where it looks like it's just a big mess. It's just one giant rock. The family system is just one big rock. And it's teetering on the brink of heading down the hill. How family systems respond to problem gambling really depends, again, on the size of the problem and what's happening in those circumstances, as well as how their family system is built ahead of time. And then when you put the addiction in, right, you throw the rock at that pile of rocks, it's going to rearrange somehow. And every family rearranges in response to a lot of crises, whether the crisis is divorce or death, loss of a job, and they have a response, and they may rearrange their roles, or the roles are fairly established. When addiction comes in, it's very typical that families rearrange their roles. And I want to show you a picture. Here's a picture of an addicted family, right? Some people may have seen some of these roles before, some of these images before. It's an example of a family system that's adjusted for addiction. We have the star in the top center, and that represents the addiction and the person addicted, because many times in an addicted family, the addiction takes the leading role and influences all of the other family roles. Just under the addiction is the enabler. The enabler is the person in the family system who makes the addiction possible, sometimes by smoothing over conflicts, by picking up the slack, or by helping to hide the addiction. The enabler experiences, the behaviors, from the enabler tend to be things that make the addict's life work. They smooth over some of the problems in the family. They pick up the pieces. They absorb some of the consequences of the addiction. And although they may seem to hold everything together, typically the feelings from an enabler are a loss of control. They feel unable to live out those wishes and dreams. The enabler is oftentimes the spouse. The 4 other figures in the diagram represent some of the children in the addicted family, and we'll go over the roles that children might hold. But first, let's talk in detail about the experience of the spouse or partner of a problem gambler. So we have the spouses or partners, could be male, could be female, but depending on the stage of gambling, the effects of problem gambling on a partner can vary greatly, from lack of trust due to a cycle of lying and trying to cover up financial difficulties or cover up some of the gambling activities. And then we have the financial difficulties, which not only are experienced by the gambler, but are then going to be experienced by the spouse. If there's a 2-parent household, maybe they went down to a 2-income household, and then maybe they've gone down to a 1-income household. There will be anxiety and stress related to the anticipation of a loved one's mood after gambling. I often give the example or ask people to think about someone in their lives who they walk on eggshells around, and you're not really sure how they're going to respond. Think about if I were a problem gambler and I was on a binge all day, I was gambling all day, I skipped work. When would my family know what happened during the day? They wouldn't know before I got home, because I wouldn't call and tell them that I was on a binge, that I was gambling all day, that I skipped work. They would know the second I walked through the door. And so living with a problem gambler, as I'm sure with a lot of other addictions, living with a problem gambler brings along with it a high level of anxiety, because you never know what's going to happen until that person walks through the door. You never know if they are going to be in a good mood, or if they're going to be in a bad mood, or if you're going to pay off some bills and go out for dinner and act like a normal family, or if the person's going to go in their bedroom and not want to see anybody, or pick up a drink because they're upset from gambling. So the partner or spouse of a problem gambler is constantly walking on eggshells. There's the frustration with the problem gambler's inability to stop gambling. A lot of us who understand addiction still get frustrated sometimes, and look at people with addiction, and maybe we don't say out loud, but in the back of our minds we think, why can't you just stop? I think all of us have had that moment in working with people with addictions. We just want to grab their shoulders and say, why can't you just stop? It's frustrating, and we understand the disease of addiction, whereas a lot of these family members do not understand addiction. They don't understand that it's a disease. They don't understand that the gambler has tried to stop and they just can't. They don't know how to stop. So they have this constant frustration with this inability of the gambler to stop gambling, that loss of control in their lives. And then a lot of times living with a problem gambler leads to depression, and a lot of times it also leads to suicidal attempts. So we're not just talking about the gambler. Again, it's not just about the individual, it's about his or her family as well. This chart looks very similar to the chart that we had on the phases of gambling. Remember we had the winning phase, the losing phase, and the desperation, and then hopelessness or rock bottom. This is a chart on the effects of compulsive gambling on a spouse. You'll see the denial phase comes first. During the denial phase, the partner may begin to notice missing monies or late bills, and that the gambler is spending less time with family than usual. It's typical during this phase for the spouse to keep concerns to him or herself and to accept the gambler's reasons for increased gambling. So during this denial phase, really the spouse may hear things like, why did you spend so long at the casino? How much money did you lose? And whatever excuse the gambler gets in that denial phase, we sort of push it off and we're like, okay, this is just a one-time thing. My spouse, him or her, it feels bad about this. He or she feels bad about this, so I'm just going to let it go. There may be some questions about unpaid bills in that denial phase, but again, in the denial phase, really, it comes back to denial. We're going to say that's not happening. I'm going to let it go. This is just a one-time thing. And then if the gambler continues gambling, we shift into like that stress phase. At this point, the spouse begins to feel rejected. Arguments within the relationship are likely to increase. And it's during this phase that the partner may attempt to control the gambler in his or her gambling. So why can't you just stop? I'm going to keep the money so that you can't go to the casino. I'm going to take the car so that you can't, because they're just trying to hold on any grasp that they can, or any strand of hope that they can to hold on to this and to get this to stop. A lot of times the gambler may promise to stop gambling, in which case during the stress phase, a lot of times the partner will step up to bail that person out. Not bail out of jail, but I mean bail out of financial difficulty. So if you didn't have the money for the mortgage, I'll loan you the money this time. If we didn't have money for the car insurance or car payment, I'll bail you out this time, whereas that money went to gambling. But during the stress phase, we usually see an increase in bailouts, which are not always the healthiest thing, although people feel that they're helping. Next comes the exhaustion phase. If the gambler keeps going and we move through that stress phase, we shift into the exhaustion phase on behalf of the spouse or the partner. At this point, the spouse has decreased time spent with other family members and friends, which means that spouse has really become isolated from their community, their neighbors, their extended family. They're trying to hide it a little bit more. They may feel a little bit of shame. There's a lot of stigma attached to a lot of addictions, as well as gambling addiction especially. So they're really trying to hide that. And with all that hiding and that isolation and that covering up, what you end up getting is a lot of stress that causes physical symptoms. There may be moments of confusion, moments of pain or exhaustion, moments of rage, times when you doubt your sanity, like, what am I doing? Why am I still here? This is never going to get better. Is it going to get better? That really, your thinking is really impaired during that exhaustion phase. And if the gambling still continues and if nobody seeks help or support for the gambling or for dealing with the gambling on behalf of the spouse or the partner is likely to hit rock bottom, which has a lot of the similar signs and symptoms as we saw with the progression of gambling on behalf of the problem gambler. You get the helplessness, the hopelessness, a mental breakdown, incidences of substance abuse, maybe some high rates of divorce or contemplating leaving the relationship. And then you have suicidal thoughts and attempts. So although the gambling might be an act by one individual with one person's income, there's no doubt that the gambling is not just negatively affecting that individual, it's affecting his or her spouse. And I mentioned male and female earlier. A lot of times we get the question, well, does problem gambling affect males differently than it affects females? If I'm a spouse of a problem gambler, will the gambling affect me differently if I'm a female spouse or partner versus a male spouse or partner? There are some differences. Obviously, there are differences in how any individual will be affected by a gambling problem, and differences in how the partners and spouses will be affected by a gambling problem. But there's also differences between males and female partners. The main differences are listed on this slide. You'll see emotions, abuse, support, marital outlook, and money management. This is where males and females differ quite regularly and quite consistently differ in their feelings and their reactions to some of the gambling. Male significant others tend to detach emotionally from their gambling partner, while female partners, on the other hand, tend to feel sort of emotional deprivation. So male partners may walk away, maybe not physically, but emotionally from a relationship. They've just stopped it. They are not feeling it anymore. They don't have as much concern and consideration for the female gambler, whereas spouses of a female gambler really feel a deprivation. They need more contact. They want more contact. So they may run more toward the gambler in seek of that or look for outside support to fulfill that emotional need. And then we have abuse. This is a big one and it's a scary one. Male partners are much more likely to abuse their gambling partner, but female partners are more likely to be abused by the gambler. The statistic for abuse among partners of problem gamblers is alarming. It's 1 in 2 partners of problem gamblers is abused in some way at home. This includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. A lot of times I hear from clinicians or from staff at gaming facilities, like, I don't think a lot of folks here or a lot of my clients have gambling addictions, and maybe only 2 of your 50 clients has a gambling problem or struggles in some way with gambling. And if that's the case, it's only 2, but you have to remember that 50% of their spouses are being abused at home. So even if you only have 2 clients who are problem gamblers or you think may be struggling with their gambling, that means it's likely that one of their spouses is either being physically, verbally, or emotionally or sexually abused at home. 50% of domestic violence is huge, or 50% case incident of domestic violence is huge. So remember, it's 1 in 2 partners of problem gamblers is abused at home. And typically this is the female partner. So who's likely to seek support for a gambling problem? You may or may not be surprised. Males are typically less likely to seek support, and female partners of a problem gambler are likely to seek support. If you look at some of the GA and Gamma-Non statistics, a lot of research has varying statistics, but pretty consistently, the main proportion of folks at GA meetings are male, and there are more females at the Gamma-Non meetings, which we'll talk about Gamma-Non. So you have GA is highly male, and Gamma-Non is highly female. And so women are much more likely to seek support for a partner's gambling problem or support for themselves in dealing with that than males are. Female partners often contemplate separation or divorce. However, males typically take the formal steps to enter or to end those partnerships. So although females may contemplate, maybe I shouldn't have ever gotten married, maybe we should get separated, maybe it would be better for him, or maybe it would be better for me. Males have those same feelings, but they're more likely to act on those feelings and take steps to officially end the marriage or the partnership or the living arrangement, whatever that relationship might be. And then it's interesting, both male and female partners tend to overspend their money, but the reasons behind some of that spending is a little bit differently. Female partners report spending money because they want nothing but the best for their family, and sometimes that may or may not come from wanting to hide what's really happening with their family, to keep up with the Joneses, as people say. While male partners report spending because they work hard and they deserve it. So although all spouses are affected in some way by gambling, all partners are, there are some differences that maybe we can use to make some generalizations about males and females, which can be helpful if you have some clients that you're working with in kind of predicting what you might have to encounter, what you might have to talk to them about. It's important to remember, however, that everybody and with every gender identification will experience a loved one's problem, gambling problem, very differently. So think about that as you're going in, and it's important to just know your clients. And then we have the children of problem gamblers. So how about the children? Again, there are some differences in how children are affected by a parent's gambling problem, and patterns are likely to emerge, enabling us to make some overarching generalizations about the effects of problem gambling. Again, just remember that everybody's individual. If we think back to the family system that I drew, with the star at the top, and we had the addict or the person with the addiction, we had the enabler underneath. Right underneath the enabler was the hero, because the hero is really the one in the family who holds everything up. The enabler may be making it easier for the person with the addict to continue their addiction, while the hero kind of holds the family together. I've heard of some people call this child the little parent. He or she fulfills many of the family values, very bragged about, takes over the role of parenting, worries about dinner when mom and dad are worried about the gambling, or helps the little ones get their homework done, and does that over an extended period of time. We're not just talking about helping out in one situation, but really takes on that role, maybe gets really great grades, even despite his or her situation, gets really great grades and gets praised because of that, star of the football team. They'll take on that sort of role. And although they seem really great on the outside, they can really hold things together and maybe getting good grades and doing really well at school and in the community, some of the feelings that he or she is experiencing, they feel like they have a pressure to achieve. They're putting aside some of the things they want to do to hold everything together for the family. And also, because everything else is sort of falling apart around them, they feel the need to make sure that everything is okay and just make sure that everything looks okay, which is where we get that need or that urge to achieve, which really can become a burden. I mean, it's great when we ask our kids to work really hard in school or practice really hard so you can do a great job on the team. But the hero child is typically burdened by a lot of that. And so they may feel overwhelmed. They may miss out on a lot of their childhood because they're taking care of their siblings and they're holding the house together. This is one of the children in a family who's at a really high rate or a really high risk of becoming addicted in some way because they're really disconnected from their self. What they're doing is not what they want to be doing. It's what they feel they need to do for the family. And then you'll see the mascot, who looks like a little cheerleader, could be a male or a female. The mascot is the one who, if you remember back to that slide that we had on the addicted family in that system, the mascot, you'll see there were lines coming from all over. The mascot is the one running around trying to keep everybody up. The mascot's the one making everybody feel better. They're trying to be funny. They're the life of the party. Very popular in school, lights up a room because they're trying to keep everybody's spirits up through whatever situation that they're encountering. And although, again, on the outside, the hero and the mascot look like they're doing really, really well, they're funny and outgoing and everybody likes them, on the inside, the mascot tends to be terrified of conflict, really nervous, doesn't want to even acknowledge that there are problems or talk about arguments. And they sort of feel this responsibility to help everybody get along. And in trying to do that and trying to please everybody, this child also often struggles with intimate relationships down the road. Because they're trying to just make everybody else happy. Again, it's not about that person. And then you'll see the one crawling who doesn't have a face. That's the scapegoat. The scapegoat is what some may describe as the problem child. It's the one who really absorbs the family issues, maybe angry, maybe aggressive. A lot of times that comes because that's the one person or child in the family who is often blamed for things that are out of his or her control. And because they're blamed for things that are out of his or her control, the scapegoat a lot of times thinks that he or she is going to be in trouble no matter what they do. So if I get good grades, I'm going to be in trouble. If I fail, I'm going to be in trouble. And at that point, why bother anymore? So a lot of the feelings are, the scapegoat a lot of times feels trapped or feels hopeless. They believe there's something wrong with him or her. And so when you come back to people identifying that child as the problem child, a lot of that comes from because the scapegoat says, whatever I do, I'm going to get in trouble. So just does whatever he or she wants anyway. So that's the one in the family who typically gets blamed for a lot and may act out on that feeling of getting blamed with everybody. Again, feeling trapped and feeling like something is wrong with him or her. And that can carry through, not just when they're a child, but that can carry through adulthood. And then the one on the right with the question mark is the lost child because we don't know where he or she is. They're sort of involved in their own little worlds. It might be comic books, it might be video games, it might be their friends. The family doesn't know what they're doing. We talk about how the middle child is sometimes lost, or the quiet child in the classroom who gets really great grades is sometimes forgotten about because they don't raise a stink and get in trouble, and then they don't get really great grades to get praise. They're just kind of in the middle. This is that lost child. A lot of times they feel sad. A lot of times they feel alone and disconnected from the family, which again can carry on to adulthood, and as an adult can feel disconnected from the family unit as a whole, maybe the family of origin, and then also his or her family that they've developed as an adult. Again, they just feel sad, alone, invisible. So now that we've got the basic idea of the effects on problem gambling on the family system as a whole and the role that all of these kids and these adults play in the family, think about what can happen to those individual children. And a lot of times I like to refer back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Any psych student, social sciences student remembers hearing about this in college. It's really a theory that helps to outline the very basic and growth needs of an individual. It's a framework that can help examine what needs are or aren't being met in an addicted family, and it helps to see how that addiction can play a role in the deficiency of the needs. If you see the bottom of the hierarchy, we have the basic needs: food, water, sleep. Same things that everybody needs to survive, right? So food, water, sleep. And then right above that, after food, water, sleep, we have safety. Not only do we need food, water, and sleep, we need a roof over our heads. And that roof over our heads keeps us safe, or whatever that building might be. It might be a car, it might be a shelter, but we need some sort of safety. And not just safety as in a shelter over our heads, but safety as in a place or home as in a place where we feel that safe. And then after we've met those basic needs of food, water, sleep, and safety, and having shelter, we can kind of move on to developing more meaningful relationships, and building our own family and friendships on our own. And then after that's established and we feel that sort of I belong to a group, which everybody, even adults, need to belong. We can say we don't need to belong and we're loners, but everybody has something that they belong to, whether it's a sports team or a work group or a peer group or a family. We all have that need to belong. And then you move into the esteem. So you belong, you're safe, you're happy, you're healthy, everything's working out. The esteem is when you work on your skills that you want to acquire to get recognized as an individual. This is where you branch out and you can become really good at your job, or you learn new things, you go to college, you earn those rewards in your life that you feel this sense of not only do I belong and I'm safe and I'm healthy, but I'm happy too, and I'm here because I earned this. And then at the top, we have that self-actualization where I'm officially living the life to its highest potential. I'm doing everything that I can, and I'm growing beyond my basic needs. But that top part is really that additional growth, that we can do after we're really settled and have built ourselves through the rest of the needs. So some of the physiological effects on the children of problem gamblers, it's not. Again, a lot of folks just think, well, it's gambling, it just has to do with money. No, it doesn't, because when the money disappears, children might have to go without food, without medication due to a drastic decrease in the household income. If I have a gambling problem and we are a two-income household and my income is now gone, we have cut our income in half. So there are things that we can't afford. We can't afford the fruits and vegetables we used to have, so we're eating hot dogs and mac and cheese every day, which I'm not against hot dogs and mac and cheese, I've done it. But we need fruits and vegetables in our diet. So there are kids who are going without healthy diets because of their parents' gambling problem. There are kids who are going out without any food or only one meal a day. Now what happens in the summer when they don't get lunch at school? Now they aren't getting lunch at home either. So food is an issue. Sleep, think about if somebody in your family has a problem that they're struggling with. Sleep is going to be an issue. You're going to worry about it. You're going to stress about it. Maybe as a child you hear your parents arguing about it. You're not really sure who's going to bring you to school tomorrow because nobody told you that. You're not sure where you're going to get lunch money for school tomorrow. Again, that anxiety and that constant not knowing what's going on and that lack of structure within your household. You don't know what to expect the next day. You don't know what to expect tonight when mom or dad comes through the door. And then you have that prolonged anxiety and stress, which again can just really bring back to that mental and physical health problems. They talk about cardiovascular disease, right? One of the main risk factors for that is a high level of stress. These kids living in these addicted families or families of a problem gambler are experiencing high levels of stress. So that can really do harm on one's mental as well as their physical health. Then we have effects on safety. Even if basic needs are met, food, water, sleep, what about shelter? Along with financial difficulties, maybe the family can't live in their house that they used to anymore. Maybe you have clients who used to live in a home and had a two-income household, and now they're living in a shelter. I think that's really the question is, how did you get into the shelter? What are the problems? And a lot of times it comes down to that financial difficulties, and kids may not understand why they have to move out of their home and move in with the grandparents, or why they're sleeping in their car. Their physical safety could be compromised depending on if they've changed neighborhoods. Have they gone from a safe neighborhood to an unsafe neighborhood? Are they sleeping in their car in the corner? That just basic physical safety is challenged or compromised. And kids thrive on routines. I don't know how many times you can hear as a parent, kids thrive on routines. They know what to expect. Routines make them feel safe and secure. Without the routines, the kids don't know what to expect. And that's where we get into that increased level of anxiety, that increased level of stress. If I don't know what to expect when somebody walks through the door, I'm walking on eggshells. If I don't know what to expect when I come to work, I'm walking on eggshells. So every time that the shelter changes, the neighborhood changes, the routines change, and we don't know what to expect, those kids are at a little bit more of an increased risk. They don't really know not just what to expect within their household, but they don't really know what's expected of them. Am I supposed to help with dinner and chores? Am I supposed to do my homework in the kitchen or in the living room? Am I supposed to just go in my bedroom and stay by myself? So really those routines and that structure within a home is so important. And when you have a gambling problem added into that, those routines and that structure and sometimes the physical place of their home is going to change, which can put kids at more risk. The change in environment coupled with that lack of routine can do damage to the children's sense of security and their safety within their own family. I mean, your family, your family of origin is supposed to be the safe place. Everybody loves you and the love will continue always. And if a child doesn't feel that from day one, you're going to move on to having trust issues, bonding issues, attachment issues, and stability issues. One of the key hallmarks of problem gambling or any addiction is lying, which ultimately leads to a lack of trust. Relationships are tested, usually severely damaged throughout the progression of a gambling addiction. People try to hide money, they try to hide time going places. And so as those lies build up, you lose that trust. And then depending on the age of the child at the onset, the foundation that was built prior to the addiction can really be challenged throughout the progression of the disease, and attachment issues are likely to develop. If you had a strong relationship to mom or dad before they had an addiction problem, that relationship is going to, at some level, maintain some sort of strength, and you're going to care about them and feel like you want to help. But if you had no relationship before then, think about that the attachment problem. And kids with attachment disorders have difficulty connecting with others. They have difficulty managing their emotions, which eventually results in, again, a lack of trust and self-worth and a fear of getting close to anybody, feeling this high level of anger and need to be in control. The stability of the family is going to be negatively affected in some way by the gambling problem, which leads to a high range of change and just the overall lack of routine and safety and security within the child's life. So not only can gambling problems have, again, effects on an individual and the spouse, it's going to feed down to the kids when we talk about food, safety, shelter, security, bonding with their family and being able to trust your family. If you can't trust your family, who can you trust? And that can lead to damaging effects later on in life as well. And then we have guilt, shame, helplessness, these sort of effects on a child's esteem, on a child's self-worth. A lot of kids may feel guilty as if they're the reason their parent developed the gambling problem. A lot of times we see this and we hear people talking about this when we're talking about children of divorces. The development of guilt is very similar in children who are living with a problem gambler. They might ask themselves, what did I do? I don't know why mom gambles. It must be to deal with us. It must be to deal with the stress that we put her through. And so that child really internalizes the gambling addiction and feels like it's somehow their fault. And there is such a stigma associated with many addictions, especially gambling problems. People don't talk about problem gambling. Nobody even knows what problem gambling is. When I say alcoholism or alcohol addiction or problem drinking, people understand what that is, but we're still at the point where people don't talk about what problem gambling is. Again, we get the question a lot, is problem gambling like when I run out of money? Well, yes, it is, but it's when it causes problems in your life. And if people aren't talking about gambling problems and we're not talking about it as clinicians and as prevention professionals and people in recovery, if nobody discusses it, there's some level of shame like, wow, my family is the only one going through this. I can't share this with anybody. And a lot of times what you get within that family system, the family of the addicted family system, you get this closed circle of we can't share anything beyond this close family or circle of unit, these people. So because it's often the case with gambling, it brings about that sense of shame. We shouldn't share our difficulties with anybody outside the home, that embarrassment about our situation, and it's that vicious cycle of internalizing one's problems. And if you constantly internalize other people's problems as your own, whether you're a child in a family or in a different situation, and you feel this constant level of guilt, I don't know what I did, I don't know how to help, you get that level of helplessness, like you just throw your hands in the air, I don't know how to help. And a lot of times children feel that. They don't even have the tools that we have to cope as adults. And so if they haven't built those healthy coping mechanisms up by the time they're 5 or 6 or 7, when their parent develops a gambling problem, or 13 or 14, they're going to feel some level of helplessness, like they don't know what to do and they don't know how to help and they can't change their family situation. They're really just stuck. So that's going to really wear on them over time. And then some of the long-term effects of a gambling problem on the child of the problem gambler. Education. Children of problem gamblers are much more likely to do worse in school. So their peers are outperforming them. They're not able to reach their full potential, whether school means elementary school, high school, or college. They're just having difficulty in school. I used to work as a counselor in a classroom, and I had a teacher who asked me why the kids weren't doing their homework. And I said, well, Timmy's not doing his homework because he has to go home and cook dinner for everybody because his parents aren't there to take care of them. The same happens a lot of times in a problem gambling household. If the mother is a problem gambler, the dad is trying to pick up the slack from mom, so is working extra hours, so that hero child or that little parent is taking care of their family. If they're taking care of their family and they're concerned about household income or where we're going to live or how we're going to get our next meal, the education really falls as a bottom priority for those kids who are at home managing those things for their family. And then we have other risky behaviors such as substance abuse problems. Children of problem gamblers are much more likely to have substance abuse issues. It can be as innocent or as minor as tobacco, and it can be as serious as heroin. Children of problem gamblers, if they don't have effective coping mechanisms, they're going to look for another way to cope with those problems. And some of the unhealthy ways of coping are eating. The unhealthy ways of coping include substance abuse, smoking cigarettes, staying out late with your friends, partying, drinking. Kids with parents who are problem gamblers are much more likely to develop those problems. So when we're talking about risky behaviors with kids, I urge people to talk about not just drug, sex, and rock and roll like we talk about, but also gambling, because you can be at an increased risk of developing a gambling problem. Children of problem gamblers are much more likely to develop unhealthy relationships as they grow older. All those things that we talked about before, having attachment issues, having bonding issues, and having trust issues, can really wear on a youth who lives in a home of problem gamblers. And when seeking a partner down the road, a lot of times it feels safe for those youth who grew up in those homes to find someone similar to the adults they grew up around, even if it is a problem gambler, because they know what to expect. They know how to handle that. And they've also figured out their role, right? That addicted family, even though it looked like chaos to us, it worked for them. They figured out how to get through with that. Maybe not get through at the level that you and I would hope that they get through, but they figured out how to get through. They know their role. So as they grow and develop, they're going to find a mate who allows them to fulfill that same role. And those roles aren't always healthy. So they're more likely to also carry the effects of codependency throughout life as they age, bringing again about unhealthy relationship patterns. More likely, children of problem gamblers are more likely to experience long-term depression and anxiety, as well as eating disorders. We don't often think about gambling and eating disorders or addiction and eating disorders together in the same conversation. But if you have no control over anything in your life, you're going to look for something to control. And a lot of folks turn to eating disorders because of difficulty control or inability to control anything in their lives because they can control their food. And so a lot of folks have an unhealthy relationship with food if they grew up in a house with problem gamblers because they have figured out how to control that part of their life while everything else was uncontrollable around them. And then children of problem gamblers attempt suicide 2 times more often than their peers. So if we think about problem gamblers, the suicide attempt and completion rate among problem gamblers is 1 in 5, which is higher than any other addiction. But children of problem gamblers are 2 times more likely than their peers to attempt suicide. That is scary. We think it's scary when there's food problems, when there's shelter problems and safety and financial problems, but suicide is a huge issue when we're talking about problem gambling and something that really needs to be taken seriously. So if you're working with children of problem gamblers, consider assessing their suicide risk rate, because we need to think about those things, which a lot of times folks don't think about. We focus on the money, and it's not just about the money. So problem gambling is not just an individual's financial problem. It affects the entire family system, and it brings about devastating consequences to everybody involved, not just the gambler and not just as big as the community, but everybody in the middle, including spouses, partners, children, parents. So how do I know if someone's being affected by problem gambling in the family? How do I figure out if a client is experiencing a gambling problem? How do I figure out if a client has a family member experiencing a gambling problem? Gambling is often called the hidden addiction because we can't see it, we can't test urine, we can't smell it, we can't test their blood. It's really about paying attention to the clues, the more subtle clues, and putting all of those clues together to really solve the mystery. These are some of the warning signs that somebody has a problem with gambling. We see tolerance on there. Tolerance is very similar. I tell people, put your substance abuse hat on, and what does tolerance mean? It means needing to gamble more and more money and for a longer amount of time in order to feel the same amount of rush. So you used to gamble with $5 or at the $5 table. Now you have to gamble at the $10 table to feel a rush. And then you have to gamble at the $50 table to feel a rush. Or you used to get excited for a Friday night poker game, and now you don't get excited unless you play poker 3 times during the week. So that's that tolerance there, just that progressive amount of time or increasing amount of time and increasing amount of money or valuables spent on the gambling. And then we have withdrawal. And people who work in substance abuse field say withdrawal is obvious when you put a drug in your system and you take that away, we're going to experience withdrawal. The same exact thing happens with gamblers. If you think about the time that a gambler wins and wins big, that excitement level boosts their dopamine, it boosts their endorphins, and they're very excited and more awake. And that feels really good, and their brain says, do that again. And the longer they do that, the more ingrained it becomes in their brain. It's a pathway, right? It's a new pathway developing saying, I have this thing I'm doing and I like the way it's feeling. If I take that away from their brain and I take that rush and excitement and dopamine and adrenaline away from their brain, the brain says, where did that go? And so you have clients who may talk about, every Saturday my husband or my wife, or every Monday he or she just feels grumpy and miserable. It could be a return to work. It could be something happened over the weekend. It could be that they're not able to gamble as much because they're returning to work and spending 8 hours at work. So when you take a gambler's form of gambling away, they sometimes go through withdrawal. They may also experience preoccupation or thinking about it constantly or talking about gambling, trying to figure out a way to get back. So preoccupation, if they're talking about it, if that's all they do for fun, for entertainment, it's a sign there may be a problem. And escape is one of the big ones. I talked about coping and healthy coping mechanisms. Gambling is not a healthy coping mechanism because the more you play, the more you lose, and the more you lose, the more stress you cause. And if gambling has become your coping mechanism when you feel stress, you're going to go back to gambling. So it really creates a vicious cycle of gambling and then stress and then gambling to deal with that stress. So any time somebody is gambling to escape something, whether it's marital problems or work problems, life in general, we've all wanted to escape. It's a sign that the gambling may be causing a problem in their life, because gambling, again, is not a healthy way to cope with problems. It may take you away from your problem for that night, but you wake up the next day and you have the same problem you had before in addition to the other problems. So not a healthy coping mechanism, a form of escape. Then we have chasing losses. A lot of problem gamblers go back to win, to chase the win, but they also aren't able to walk away when they lose. The social gamblers lose their $50 they went with, and they walk away and say, I'm done. The problem gamblers chase those losses, keep going back to try to win their money back. When they don't win their money back, they tend to lie about where the money went. And I say to folks, who are problem gamblers lying to? They're lying to everybody. They're lying to their spouse about where they were during the amount of missing time, or lying to their children about why they didn't make the football game, or lying to their mom on why they didn't make the car payment or the house payment. So there's a lot of lying and mistrust going on. And because of that lying, they're jeopardizing relationships and opportunities. That's what that R's and O's stand for. They're jeopardizing relationships because they're lying, they're hiding, they're spending less time, and then possible job opportunities or educational opportunities. They may ask for bailout, and again, we caution people, don't bail somebody out. You need to work through your debt. If you're in your 20s and you get in over your head and your parents pay it off for you, you're not going to learn how to dig yourself out of that hole, and that's what we need gamblers to really understand, how to dig themselves out of that hole. And by bailing out, sometimes you enable them to go back to that problem. And then loss of control. Priorities really shift when you're a problem gambler, and your family isn't number one priority anymore, and neither is your job. It's gambling. And maybe you realize that and you try to stop and you just don't know how. A lot of gamblers are able to identify that they've lost control or that their priorities are shifted, but they have a hard time really getting themselves out of that and trying to figure out how to stop that cycle. So if this looks familiar to anybody, it's because it's the DSM-5 criteria for gambling disorder. If you notice, a lot of these are very similar to the signs and symptoms and the criteria for a substance abuse disorder. That's because in the DSM-5, gambling was officially moved from the obsessive control disorders into the addictive and substance-related disorders section. So now, again, it's in the DSM-5 as an addiction. So what are some signs that family members might notice in problem gamblers? A change in communication patterns is a big one. Maybe your spouse used to call every day at lunch or on his or her way home. Suddenly that stopped. You used to talk to your loved one about your day and whether what went well, what went not well, and suddenly that person tells you nothing about their day or doesn't really want to hear about your day. And you used to be able to openly communicate concerns about things with your partner, and now everything may seem to lead to an argument. So there's a huge change in communication patterns, and family members may bring that up in therapy or with a clinician that, I just can't talk to my husband, I just can't talk to my wife anymore. She doesn't want to talk, she's hiding things, I don't know what's going on. And then there's an increase in the distance and or secrecy that often accompanies a gambling problem. Again, gambling is often referred to as the hidden addiction because you can't smell it, you can't see it, but there's still some effort that goes into that hiding, being vague about why you were late, hiding scratch-off tickets, betting slips from the racetrack, and picking up the mail every day before the partner gets it. And so there's some level of secrecy. We don't talk openly about the budget anymore. Everything is fine. Doesn't spend a lot of time at home, tries to stay away, and doesn't really want to discuss those issues. So that they're more distant with the family. You don't really feel like you know them anymore, and they're trying to hide things, or you sense that they're trying to hide things. And the more time that's spent gambling, the less time that's spent with family or friends. We only have 24 hours in every day, and somehow we manage to fill those hours with sleep, with wellness activities, with entertainment, work, and time with family. Whenever you add something into that mix, such as increased time spent gambling, something else has to give. If you never gambled before, or you only gambled on Friday nights and now you're gambling every day, that time is being taken away from sleep or work or exercise or time with your family and friends. And a lot of times, the first thing to go when priorities shift is that time with family, and that gets noticeably reduced. And then the obvious is the financial problems. Typically, family members start to notice a change in communication. They might notice that increased secrecy and less time spent with family, and they might question what's going on. The thing that really hits at home for family members a lot of times is when they see a financial statement, whether it's a mortgage statement or a credit card bill, and that's when they really connect the dots to realize that there's a gambling issue going on. There's money disappearing, and I don't know where it's going. So more often than not, family members discover a gambling problem when they notice changes in those financial statements. So think about that as a clinician. And as a clinician, what are some things that you can think about in family members? A lot of the same things, financial issues. If they're having financial struggles, but nobody's jobs have changed, they haven't changed their income, they haven't changed their bills or their expenses in a long time. So where are these financial problems coming from? The marital strife and changes in communication or changes in relationship. If your clients are expressing that they are feeling depressed and they're experiencing anxiety, it's important to question more. And then an undue or an increased burden at home. Maybe somebody comes in, a husband comes in and says, my wife used to do A, B, and C, and I did D, E, and F. And now I'm doing all of them. And those roles are really shifting. And if you can't find something else, another reason for it, it's important to dig to see if it may be a gambling problem. These signs, along with all the other previous signs discussed, are topics that should be explored when working with families who are in crisis or some sort of change to determine whether or not it's a gambling problem that's at the root of their problems. Again, it could be something else. It could be a job change. It could be a move. It could be grief. But there's always the possibility that it's a gambling problem. So it's important to dig a little bit deeper because it's not an easy one to spot. It's not something that you can see or smell or taste or test their urine or blood for. So it's important to maybe dig a little bit deeper as a clinician to ask those family members what's going on, how are they being affected, and what's changed in their lives recently. So then what can you do about it? What can family members do about it if they find themselves in that relationship? What can clinicians do? Some things family members can do to help themselves, and if there's family members watching today, I applaud you for trying to learn more about it. And these are tips that clinicians can really that clinicians can use to give to family members as well, so that family members can help themselves. Right at the top of the list is self-care, because you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of other people. Your loved ones are struggling, and they're going to need your support in the beginning, and in order to maintain their road to recovery or establish their road to recovery, but you can't pour water out of an empty pitcher. So you have to take care of yourself and make sure that you're feeling comfortable within yourself before you can go giving to a lot of other folks. Loved ones should also ensure that their finances are safe. This is a big one, and it's an uncomfortable one for a lot of people to talk about their finances with their therapist. And a lot of clinicians are not comfortable talking about finances and personal budgeting or budgeting strategies with their clinicians. But with problem gambling, it's something to just be aware of and become familiar with. Some tools that might mean shifting or setting up an individual bank account. If everything's in a joint account, maybe you urge your client who's a family member to set up an individual bank account. change authorizations on some of the accounts, whether his or her name is on both accounts, or taking the other person's name off some of those expenses. For some partners, caring for your own finances might be completely new, and there's going to be a huge learning curve if you've never done that before. And one fairly common thing that loved ones attempt to do, again, is provide that bailout for the gambler. But remember, it's important to take care of yourself first and not give everything away to the gambler. If you eliminate all of the gambler's debt, it enables them to go back to his or her unhealthy patterns of behavior. So the ultimate goal is really to just take care of yourself first so that you're emotionally stable and financially stable and able to help that person when they're ready to begin their road to recovery. Loved ones should also always be encouraged to seek support no matter what stage of gambling or the level of consequences experienced. If you're a clinician and a family member says, I think my husband is gambling, I don't really know what it is, it's important to urge them to get support. They have you there for support, and they may need some other support group or self-help, or to seek support outside the family, but it's important for them to develop healthy relationships outside of the family as well, because those family relationships are really being challenged. So it's important for them to seek some support. The key is that the family members are always encouraged to seek support. Whether the gambler is getting help for their gambling or not, the family member should be encouraged to seek help. And then education, it's important to learn. So again, if there are family members watching, I applaud you for coming here with us today and learning. It's a key that family members learn about gambling disorder and how addiction works, because as I mentioned before, it's so frustrating as an addiction professional when somebody just won't stop and you want them to stop and they just don't see the consequences, they don't see the change in priorities. And so it's important that family members understand addiction, that it's a disease, that people can't just stop, and understand how some of that happens and what that process is, so that they aren't as frustrated with their loved one and they can really understand and empathize with what they're going through. And as clinicians, it's important to remember that the family is the key to helping the problem gamblers. Although it's important to engage problem gamblers in treatment and help and support, it's really important to bring the family into the mix too. Family members often must provide financial support during treatment. So if a problem gambler has to go to inpatient treatment or has lost his or her job, that family member is really going to have to pick up the slack. So it's important to bring those family members in so that they understand what's important, what's not as important, what are some key things to do to keep themselves safe and to help the problem gambler. And the family members are often the primary source of support in treatment and recovery. So although the family system is challenged during an addiction or during experiencing a family member's gambling problem, that family member, a lot of times, it really goes back to that system, that original family system that they established. And when you find out that your friends aren't your friends anymore, or you find out they say you find out who your real friends are when you're struggling, a lot of times it comes back and it's your family, it's your immediate family or your family of origin, maybe your parents, your wife, your siblings, your children. Those are the ones who are going to support the problem gambler during his or her road to recovery, and that during that treatment phase as well. And so the family is usually that primary source of treatment support, so it's important to get them into help. And the family members are often that pivotal moment to get the family member who's gambling, to enable them to begin treatment or to begin on their road to recovery. A lot of times that comes from the family. As with many other addictions, denial is the first stage. I don't have a problem. And it's when the family has repeatedly over and over again brought out negative consequences, brought them to light, demonstrated how priorities have shifted, and demonstrated and made those links between the gambling and the problem, that really helps to push that gambler into getting help and support and treatment. Not always the case, and again, people can't get help a lot of times till they're ready. Not always, but a lot of times. But the family is the key into getting that process in motion. And again, if the family members aren't well, they can't help the problem gambler. So it's important to engage the family in recovery, and so that when the problem gambler has finished their treatment, and is on the road to recovery, they can come back to a safe, happy, and healthy home where everybody has dealt with what's happened. And so engage the significant other in support and treatment no matter what, as long as you can get them to come into there. So before we leave, I want to offer some resources that can be of assistance for family members, as well as those of us who are working with family members or problem gamblers. One of which is the Gam-Anon 20 questions. Gam-Anon is very similar to Al-Anon in that it's a fellowship of men and women who've been affected by the gambling problem of a loved one. And everybody is welcome at Gam-Anon meetings. Your partner does not have to be a member of GA for you to go to Gam-Anon. And anybody who has been affected, it does not have to be a spouse, it does not have to be a child, it can be a brother, a mother, a friend. Anybody who's been affected by somebody else's gambling problem is welcome at Gam-Anon. Gam-Anon has developed 20 questions to help loved ones determine whether or not they're living with somebody struggling with gambling. So if you have a client who thinks that, their loved one might be struggling, but they're not really sure if they're in that situation or what it is, these 20 questions can sort of be a guide to really get that person to start thinking about what's happening in their home. Questions cover topics such as secrecy and lying, which is one of the big ones, any personality changes or unexplained absences, anxiety from attempting to predict a loved one's mood. So it goes back to that walking on eggshells. Are you always walking on eggshells when the person comes home because you don't know if they've been gambling or if they won or if they lost? It really gets at that anxiety that's deep inside from that. The attempt to control your loved one's gambling. So if you've tried or you've brought it up and you see that it's causing problems, that could be a sign. And then depression or remorse due to gambling, to find out if your loved one has that depression or remorse due to their gambling. Have you ever desired to end a relationship? And then it has some questions that get at the financial struggles to try to connect the dots to see if those might be caused by a gambling problem. So the Gam-Anon 20 questions can really help in trying to get family members or loved ones of a problem gambler to understand gambling and to help them identify if that's really what they're dealing with at home. And regarding the finances on the GA or the Gam-Anon 20 questions, there are some questions about finances, and not everybody is comfortable talking about finances. When I do trainings, I typically say, who's really comfortable doing their budget on your own budget? And I sometimes get 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 hands. Don't think I've ever gotten more than 5. Nobody's really comfortable talking about finances, and nobody's comfortable sharing. A lot of people aren't comfortable sharing their finances with other folks. So the National Council on Problem Gambling teamed up with the National Endowment for Financial Education a number of years ago, and they created some guides. One is for loved ones of problem gamblers, and one is for treatment professionals. The personal financial strategies for the loved ones of problem gamblers give some strategies, some do's and don'ts, as well as some guidelines for partners and loved ones of problem gamblers to follow. So number one, they can take care of themselves, and how best can you help a problem gambler? It goes over like things such as bailout are not always safe, and here's why. And it gives some guidelines on ways to protect your own finances and to protect yourself from a problem gambler if that person is not ready to start their road to recovery. And then they've also created a guide for treatment professionals that provides some guidance for clinicians and professionals in helping problem gamblers as well as their loved one in talking about finances. So if you're a clinician and you're not comfortable talking about finances and you get a problem gambler, this is something good to read before you have people identify as problem gamblers so that you're comfortable talking about finances with your clients if you don't already do so. And if you do, hopefully you can pick up some new tips. If you're working with adults or children who are experiencing a loved one's gambling problem, Don't Bet Yet is a great resource. It was developed out of our office. It's a main piece of the campaign is a cartoon video that depicts what it's like to live with a problem gambler from a child's perspective. You'll see the monster on the screen there. That's I don't remember his name, but that's the monster from the Go Away Monster video. And really it identifies or it signifies the gambling problem. And so the youth on the right that you'll see, when he dreams, he has these dreams about this monster, and he sucks up their home, and he sucks up their car, and he sucks up their money. So it's really the gambling problem. And then when the child wakes up, you'll see his mom and dad sort of talking about the problem and what that child goes through. It's meant to be for 9 to 13-year-olds. I always encourage people to preview it before you use the video or any of the materials to show with youth, just to make sure that's appropriate for the client or the youth that you're working with. The website also offers a printable comic book that's modeled right after the video. So if you're more comfortable using a book or a handout, you can use that. And there are other activities to use in discussing a parent's problem gambling with a child. So this is really for the children of problem gamblers, although you could use it for other audiences if you found it appropriate or helpful. We also have Know the Odds, which is a public-facing campaign, is again created by us in order to educate the public about problem gambling and the resources available to those struggling or negatively affected by someone else's gambling. Know the Odds, we refer to it as KTO. It's a great resource for loved ones who are attempting to understand and learn about problem gambling and what their loved one is going through. So we talked about those things that it's important for loved ones to do. One is learn to just understand what problem gambling is and what it looks like and how it affects people and the cost that it has to society as well as to individuals. And on this website, it's just self-guided. There's an explanation under what is problem gambling about, just a brief overview of what problem gambling is. There are ebooks, then the ebooks include ebooks about youth gambling, staying safe after recovery. One is called Faces of Problem Gambling Recovery, and that has stories about people in New York who are in recovery from problem gambling so that people understand there's no stigma, there's no shame associated with it. A lot of people experience problem gambling and they're in recovery and it works and it happens. So it's important to read some of those stories. You also see videos and some PSAs that are on the website. We have some about how to talk to your family members about gambling, and they give scenarios where folks acknowledge and talk to their loved one about their problem gambling. So if you have a family who's thinking about approaching their loved one and talking to them, those might be some good resources. We also have one that's about seniors and problem gambling. We have some about youth and problem gambling, adults, and then there's one specifically for veterans who are experiencing problem gambling because they're a special population who are at an increased risk of developing a gambling problem. There's also infographics. One is the cost of gambling, of a problem gambling, and that infographic is interactive. You punch in the numbers and it tells you how much money is spent on gambling over a certain amount of time. The other one is the path of problem gambling, which helps family members or individuals walk through what it looks like to have a gambling problem and how that develops. Again, there's no line. There's no line that says if you spend $500 in one night, you have a problem. It's not as simple as that. It just sort of happens over time without you noticing. You just notice bits and pieces. So that path of problem gambling infographic can really help to demonstrate and show somebody how that progression of problem gambling can help. Also on the website, there are blogs, and there are a lot of blog posts about family. So if you click the blog and you click the tag on the right that says family, you can find that. And then there's a find help button on the right. That's the New York State directory of all problem gambling services in New York State. And those are directly from OASAS. So those are the OASAS services. So the inpatient, outpatient, addiction treatment centers, those are all on there. So if you're interested in finding where the nearest one is to you, you can check that. It's listed by county. And if you have no idea and you're not sure where to turn people, you can call the New York State Hope line. It's 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. You can call or text. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you're a client or you're a family member and you want to know where the nearest treatment center is to you, you can call and they'll let you know. If you are a clinician and you want to know who in your area treats problem gamblers, you can call the Hope line and they will let you know. You can also use the website, but you can call or text, and then we have our directory online as well. So my hope is that this webinar has given you, or this Learning Thursday has given you guys a solid foundation in understanding how problem gambling can affect family members and what some of those family members can do to help themselves and how as a clinician you can help them. Some tips before you go: it's important to understand your own view of gambling as well as how your clients define gambling. So you can really all speak about problem gambling from a helping perspective and start with that same foundation. Again, it just really goes back to as simple as in assessments, instead of asking how often do you gamble, it's how often do you go to the racetrack, how often do you go to the casino, how often do you play cards, asking gambling specific questions in entertainment, things like that, so that people really understand it. Problem gambling is not just an individual's problem. It's not not just a financial problem. It can affect the entire family system, and it can have long-term negative effects on those who are most closely related with a problem gambler. Not always the spouse, not always the child. It could be the parents or the brother, anybody who's really close to that problem gambler. And then because you can't see, smell, or chemically test for a gambling problem, it's important to pay attention to the many cues that can lead you to understand that a family struggles and whether or not those struggles are related to a gambling problem. And if they are related to a gambling problem, it's important to engage the family members as soon as possible, engage them in seeking support, engage them in treatment, so that they can help their loved ones when their loved one is ready. And then lastly, I challenge everyone watching to explore the additional resources available for problem gamblers as well as family members of problem gamblers. explore online resources, explore books, explore websites, explore the resources available in your community. If you're not sure where their nearest Gamblers Anonymous or Gam-Anon meeting is, go on the website and check it out so that you can see where the nearest resource is, so that when you are asked to help somebody who's struggling or a family member who's struggling, you're armed with everything that you need. So if anybody has any questions, I appreciate everybody for coming and choosing to learn more about the effects of problem gambling on families and what you're all doing to reduce the shame and stigma associated with gambling problems. If there's anything you'd like more information about, if you'd like more detailed information or more detailed slides with information, you can contact me. You can contact Jennifer Berg. Our information is up there. So pause if you need to write that information down. And again, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. The work that you all do and the fact that you're sitting watching a webinar about problem gambling, how it affects family, shows us that there are folks out there who care, and there are folks who want to help reduce the stigma and shame associated with problem gambling and to help the family members. So much is focused on helping individuals, but really it's the family system that we need to help. We can't just change one person. We have to change our people, places, and things in order to prevent and help problem gamblers. So I appreciate everybody for coming today. If you have any questions, again, the email address is learningthurs@oasas.ny.gov, and you can contact myself or Jennifer Berg. Thanks everyone for showing up.
Well, this is Patty again, and I'm here to thank you all as well. I want to thank Jennifer for working with the Learning and Development Unit to make sure that this training took place. And I especially want to thank Jamie for her time, for her effort, and for the knowledge she brought today in providing you with the presentation that is informative, current, up-to-date, and more relevant, I believe, than people seem to know it is. So thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Jennifer. And to all of you who joined us today, I would like to thank you as well. All that being said, enjoy your day. We will see you in September. Bye now.